Initially there were some initial raids on police stations or whatever else, but for a long time it was much more of a war of words, and it wasn't a meaningful insurgency initially. But by going back to the countryside where 80% of the population of Nepal lived, and by having very clear demands about the things that affected people's day-to-day lives, the Maoist movement started to gain popular support and a lot more participation, and really get a response from people. Further, they would take up people's actual day-to-day demands. They would take up the right of the rights of women or people of low caste within a village or a population. They would take up the rights of national groups to be taught in their native language, or take up do land reforms when they got stronger and distribute land to people without it, or also force corrupt police either out of the village or moneylenders was another big one. There was a lot of problems with very corrupt moneylenders. And so by taking up people's day-to-day sort of demands and issues, they were able to be the ones that had tried to make change through Parliament and not being able to do so. So it had gone to the people and to make the change happen in the countryside. So into this sort of started to grow quite substantially. And by 2001, this was making significant parts of the countryside were under de facto Maoist control, and there was a real challenge to the state. And in 2001, two pretty fundamental things started to change. Occurred. Firstly, the Maoist Party of Nepal adopted what they referred to as Prachanda Party. Prachanda is the head of the Maoists, their chairperson, and that's him featured there. The Prachanda path was sort of getting away from some of the more dogmatic sort of beginnings of the Maoists, but started to look at the concrete situation that they faced and trying to find more ways to move forward in that. They started to look to the cities to find more people who broadly could be involved in a democratic movement against the king to start moving the revolutionary process forward. The second thing of significance that happened in 2001 was the Royal Massacre. This is the royal family here, or was at the time. The official story of the Royal Massacre is that Prince Dipendra Senta had a dispute with his ongoing dispute with his parents over a marriage. They didn't approve of a woman he wanted to marry. So one night, while drunk and stoned, he got a rather high-powered firearm and killed his family at a sort of small party thing. That's perfectly sort of a reasonable explanation. Whiskey and cocaine is never a particularly good combination, and then when you throw in firearms, that's somewhat dangerous. But there's also a, particularly amongst the people in Nepal, there was a lot of talk of a conspiracy. There was never a proper investigation of it, so it's hard to tell exactly what happened. But fundamentally, there were some real political changes that happened out of this. This side of the royal family was much more liberal, had kept the military largely out of the conflict that was erupting in the countryside, and was sort of much more responsive to sort of liberal changes. The new king, Gyanendra, which was the king's brother, immediately started to become more authoritarian. He started to involve the military into the conflict directly, which resulted in a lot of human rights abuses. He started to crack down on democratic rights, even of the more bourgeois and sort of liberal parties that existed in the cities. And fundamentally, a lot of public support then what support there was for the monarchy evaporated as they sort of very publicly shot themselves to pieces. In 2002, Gyanendra dismissed Parliament, and then in 2005, and he sort of went to governments he sort of handpicked from the different political parties. And then in 2005, he even dismissed all semblance of civilian government and took all power back under his own personal control as king. And this tied in very well with the Maoists' Prachanda Party. This sort of forced a lot of the urban, more urban and liberal sort of forces in Nepali society into the revolutionary sort of the revolutionary camp, and sort of broadened out the revolutionary movement against the king. And this sort of came together in 2006 in the Jana Andolan. Jana Andolan 2 being the second people's movement against the monarchy and for democracy. This originally started as a call for a strike between a general strike between April 5th and 9th in 2006. However, on the 8th, the King declared a curfew and declared shoot-on-sight sort of notices of protesters. So the popular movement declared the strike indefinite, and after 2 weeks of attempts to repress the popular dissent and including flying around Kathmandu in helicopters and shooting at protesters with machine guns, the King was forced to back down. And initially he tried to do exactly what the monarchs had done in 1950 and then 1990 to make a deal with the sort of the more liberal leadership of the movement, and sort of to quite dissipate the popular support. But unlike in 1950 and then like in 1990, there wasn't just a sole leadership of sort of very bureaucratic and self-interested sort of more bourgeois sort of types. But there was a popular and a leadership that had come around the Maoist party that had come from the people, and it was very conscious of the need for real and fundamental change. So the King wasn't able to make those concessions, find those concessions within the movement, and under popular pressure, led largely by the Maoists, there was finally decreed a constituent, so there to be elections to a constituent assembly in 2008. They ended up happening in 2008 after a couple of delays. The media in Kathmandu, very much isolated from the rest of the country. The media sort of ownership is very much amongst the elite in Kathmandu. There was a lot of talk about in the lead up to the elections about how the Maoists would respond to losing the elections. Because inevitably the revolutionaries didn't have much popular support. It was just sort of a few people running around the hills with guns causing a bit of trouble. But when the elections did happen, as you can fairly easily see from this map across the country, the red being the Maoists and the revolutionary movement, they won quite substantially across the country in different areas. They only make up about 40% of the seats in the assembly, which isn't complete, which isn't obviously a majority. But other smaller parties that are close to the Maoists or have leftist sort of platforms do make up a majority, or groups that have split from the Maoists. And fundamentally, there was a real the Royalist parties got less than half a dozen seats in the entire assembly. There was a real vote for revolutionary change. And this sort of so it was a sort of a vindication of the revolution, and fundamentally it should have continued. So a government led by the revolutionaries was formed, and this sort of started doing some progressive reforms. Initially, it made a new law to provide employment opportunities to unemployed youth. It started to organise a literacy campaign, etc. But as it was led by revolutionaries, and as they were very conscious of the need for institutional change within Nepal, they fundamentally started to do things to try and challenge the state and to try and create the basis for its breaking up. They tried to create new local bodies and give them more responsibility to get the functions of state out of Kathmandu and away from the bureaucracy. Started to do these sort of measures, which then led them fundamentally and brought to the fore that fundamental contradiction between government and state, and the real power at fore. As part of the peace agreement, it was agreed that the military, the old Royalist military, and the Maoist People's Liberation Army would be integrated into a new army around a new constitution drafted by the people of Nepal. The Maoist the revolutionary government were pushed for the peace process and these agreements to be fulfilled and to create these new things. However, the military is heavily royalist and maintained and continues to be, refused to recognise the very legitimacy of the current government. So after repeated insubordination, the government led by the Maoists issued first essentially a please explain to the head of the military, who then, when he refused to have a part of that, dismissed him. Then, unconstitutionally, the right-wing parties used the president of Nepal to reinstate him and unconstitutionally defended the military. The Maoists then resigned from government as the contradiction had been brought to the fore in the eyes of all the people of Nepal as to the differences between governmental change and state change.